Hey there, welcome back to Lunar History, where we take the ordinary and sometimes overlooked moments from history and turn them into stories you want to forget. Tonight, we're re-diving into a world you probably didn't learn about in school, the Wild West. But not the cowboys, not the gunfights, not the gold rush. Instead, we're re-exploring the lives of the women who ran the saloons and brothels, the madams who quietly shaped frontier towns with their intelligence, courage, and sheer determination. Before we get started, if you enjoy hearing history stories told in a cozy, captivating way, don't forget to hit that like button. Subscribe to the channel and ring the bell so you don't miss any of our weekly episodes. And while you're at it, drop a comment below telling me where you're retuning in from and what time it is there. It's always fascinating to see people around the world falling asleep to these stories. Now, imagine it's the 1870s. You've just stepped off a dusty trail into a frontier town. The sun is hot, the streets are rough, and the air carries a mixture of wood, smoke, fresh horse manure, and the faint perfume that clings to the women who run the town saloons. You might think that life here is all guns and gold, but there's another kind of power at play. Behind every successful saloon is a woman who knows how to navigate a world stacked against her. She manages people, money, and even the law, all while surviving the harsh realities of frontier life. These women weren't just service providers. They were business strategists, negotiators, and protectors. They ran tight operations, kept their staff safe, and often outsmarted anyone who tried to take advantage of them. And the fascinating part, most of society didn't even notice. Their influence is hidden in the corners of history, quietly shaping communities, economies, and even the culture of the Wild West. As we walk through the rooms of a saloon, listen closely. You'll hear the creak of floorboards under hurried footsteps, the soft murmur of conversation, the clink of silver coins exchanged for service that kept families fed and businesses running. Each sound tells a story of resilience, creativity, and survival in a place where few women could stand on their own. Tonight, we'll meet madams like Mattie Silks, whose cleverness turned obstacles into opportunities, and others who navigated danger, rivalry, tragedy without losing their grip on their lives or their livelihoods. So, get comfortable. Maybe grab a blanket or a cup of something warm and let your mind settle into the world of frontier towns. This isn't just a story of survival. It's a story of brilliance, courage, and quiet power. And by the end of tonight's episode, you'll see that the Wild West wasn't just shaped by gunslingers and miners. It was shaped by women who refused to be overlooked. Women who mastered their world when no one else thought they could. Ready? Let's step inside. As the sun dips lower in the sky and the shadows of the frontier town stretch across the uneven streets, you begin to notice the rhythm of life in these small, bustling communities, an orchestra of clattering hooves, slamming saloon doors, the distant hum of miners returning from the hills, their faces streaked with dirt and determination, unaware that the real pulse of the town beats not just in their gold-stained hands or their calloused feet, but in the sharp, calculating minds of the women who run its saloons and brothels, the madams whose presence and influence, though largely unacknowledged by official records, shaped the social and economic fabric of the Wild West in ways that were as complex as they were essential. These women, often operating under assumed names for both safety and strategy, were far more than proprietors of nightlife. They were astute business leaders, deft negotiators, and the unseen architects of communities, balancing ledgers and human lives with the same meticulous care, knowing that a single misstep could bring ruin not only to their enterprise, but to the dozens of women who depended on them for shelter, sustenance, and protection. In the era of the 1870s, when most doors to independence were firmly closed to women, madams discovered the narrow cracks in a rigid social order and walked through them with a combination of boldness, ingenuity, and relentless perseverance, turning what society deemed scandalous into a form of power that demanded both respect and caution. Unlike the men whose exploits are celebrated in dime novels and legends, these women worked in the shadows. Their influence measured not by gunfights or political office, but by their ability to maintain order in chaotic frontier towns, to mediate disputes among miners, merchants, and travelers, and to cultivate loyalty among the women who chose or were forced by circumstance to work under their guidance. They understood the delicate dance of appearances and discretion, welcoming patrons with charm and grace while quietly asserting authority, ensuring that every coin, every interaction, and every minor conflict contributed to the stability and profitability of their establishment. Walking through the creaking wooden halls of such a saloon, one could sense the invisible threads of organization, discipline, and mutual protection that tied the operation together, from the careful selection of staff to negotiation of safe lodgings for women traveling across dangerous terrain, to the intricate strategies for attracting clientele, while minimizing the risks posed by law enforcement or local vigilantes, who often looked the other way when rules were bent, but were quick to intervene when conflict erupted. Each madam developed her own style, some more commanding, others warmer, but all united by an understanding that survival depended on a mixture of intelligence, empathy, and an unyielding awareness of the fragile balance that defined frontier life. These women, often overlooked in conventional histories, were not only entrepreneurs, but also community leaders, problem solvers, and guardians of their own fiercely constructed realms, creating spaces where the women who worked for them could earn a living, find a measure of safety, and, at least for a time, carve out a space of autonomy in a world that rarely afforded it. What is truly remarkable, and what separates these women from the caricatures often found in popular imagination, is their extraordinary ability to transform a profession that society looked down upon into a thriving, highly organized, and surprisingly sophisticated business empire. A feat that required not just courage, but a rare combination of intelligence, foresight, and relentless resourcefulness that allowed them to navigate a world stacked against them at every turn. These madams understood, better than most, that survival in the frontier was about more than simply offering a service. It was about building trust, managing risk, and orchestrating an entire ecosystem in which every detail mattered, from the careful management of finances and the protection of their staff to the subtle negotiation of relationships with local law enforcement and influential patrons, whose favor could mean the difference between prosperity and ruin. And they did all of this while operating in a society that offered women few legitimate avenues for independence, few legal rights, and little tolerance for any deviation from narrowly prescribed roles, forcing them to develop a kind of strategic acumen that was both practical and, in many ways, revolutionary for their time. Each decision made within the walls of a saloon or a brothel was a calculated step in an ongoing game of survival and advancement, knowing which patrons could be trusted, when to extend credit, how to mediate conflicts quietly before they escalated into violence, and how to maintain an environment that balanced safety with profitability, all while projecting an image of calm authority that reassured customers and staff alike. For, in such spaces, perception often carried as much weight as actual power. Hey, and the most successful madams were masters at reading people, anticipating problems, and turning potential obstacles into opportunities. Maddie Silks, for instance, moved through mining towns with a keen eye, assessing the economic landscape and the personalities of both patrons and competitors, ensuring that her establishment remained not just viable, but dominant, and in doing so, she demonstrated an understanding of human behavior, supply and demand, and tactical negotiation that would rival any business leader of the modern era. Yet, perhaps what is most compelling about these women is that their empires were built in a world that refused to acknowledge them. While male entrepreneurs, politicians, and outlaws were lionized in newspapers and dime novels, madams were forced to operate in the shadows. Their success measured quietly in the steady flow of coins, the loyalty of staff, and the respect, sometimes grudging, sometimes genuine, of the communities they served. And in that quiet mastery of an often chaotic and dangerous environment, they not only secured their own independence, but also carved out a space where other women could survive, earn a living, and, if only briefly, taste the autonomy that the frontier so rarely offered. These women turned marginalization into opportunity, adversity into innovation, and necessity into a finely tuned art of business and survival, leaving behind legacies that, while rarely celebrated, continue to fascinate and inspire those who look closely enough to see the ingenuity and power that existed behind the swinging doors of the Wild West. Stepping inside one of these frontier saloons is like entering an entirely different world, a place where the air is thick with a mixture of wood smoke from the pot-bellied stove, the sharp tang of whiskey, the faint traces of perfume that never quite mask the more pungent aromas of hard work and long nights, and where every sound, the clatter of spurs on rough wooden floors, the muted laughter of patrons exchanging stories from the trails, the occasional strum of a piano struggling to keep rhythm serves as a constant reminder that life here is anything but gentle. And yet, it is precisely in this relentless environment that the madams thrive, moving gracefully between tables, offices, and the rooms upstairs, balancing countless responsibilities that would overwhelm even the most experienced manager, all the while ensuring that each of the women who work under their guidance is safe, accounted for, and treated with a measure of respect that the world outside the saloon so rarely affords them. From the moment the first shafts of morning sunlight filtered through thin cotton curtains to the late hours, when the last horse-drawn wagon rumbles down the street, the day is a continuous cycle of labor, negotiation, and vigilance, tallying earnings with a keen eye for every coin, checking that supplies of food and drink are sufficient for the unpredictable flow of patrons, resolving disputes that could easily spiral into violence if left unchecked, and constantly scanning for threats both from the outside world, drunken strangers, scrupulous competitors, or the sometimes unpredictable whims of local law enforcement, and from within, as personalities clash, emotions flare, and the delicate balance of relationships among staff must be maintained with tact, firmness, and empathy. It is a life that demands a level of mental acuity and physical endurance that few would associate with women operating behind the swinging doors of a saloon. But for these madams, it is simply the reality they navigate every day, often rising before dawn to oversee preparations, lending an ear or a hand to those in need, and only allowing themselves the smallest moments of rest before the next wave of responsibilities arrives. The physical demands are relentless, moving between the bar, the rooms, and the office, standing for hours as customers arrive, walking the boards with a practiced elegance that belies the weariness settling into muscles that have carried heavy crates, swept floors, and climbed stairs countless times, while the mind remains equally taxed, calculating accounts, anticipating problems before they arise, remembering the preferences and histories of every regular, and constantly strategizing to keep the business not only solvent, but thriving. Each day presents new challenges, whether it is dealing with an injured patron, negotiating a payment dispute, managing supplies that have run low, or calming a nervous newcomer who is seeing the chaos of frontier life for the first time. And through it all, the madams must maintain a demeanor that inspires confidence, projects authority, and reassures both staff and customers that order will be maintained no matter what storms pass through the town or the saloon. And yet, in the midst of this ceaseless activity, there is also a rhythm, a strange poetry to the work, the cadence of coins clinking on the counter, a soft murmur of conversations weaving between laughter and the occasional raised voice, a quiet exchanges of encouragement or counsel between the madam and her staff, all of which creates a sense of controlled chaos that, for those who can master it, becomes not just a means of survival, but a space in which skill, intuition, and resilience transform the saloon into a place of opportunity, safety, and influence, and where the women at the helm of these enterprises prove day after day. That they are far more than the fleeting stereotypes imposed upon them by a judgmental society. Within the walls of a bustling saloon, the life of a madam is a complex choreography of duties that demands constant attention. It's an almost preternatural ability to anticipate the needs of both staff and patrons, and a mind capable of juggling countless variables without ever faltering. For every moment carries weight. Every decision ripples through the small ecosystem she oversees, and the smooth running of her establishment depends on her ability to manage multiple responsibilities with a blend of precision, caution, and authority that few outsiders could ever comprehend. From the first light of day, she is already surveying the rooms, checking that her staff are present, well rested enough to face another grueling shift, and prepared to conduct themselves with a balance of charm and professionalism that keeps the saloon both welcoming and orderly, all while calculating the day's expected revenue, tallying previous earnings, and deciding how best to allocate resources to ensure the business remains profitable in a world where supplies are unpredictable. Storms can delay shipments, and competition from rival operators can strike without warning, threatening not just her income, but the stability of her entire operation. Overseeing her staff requires a careful mix of guidance, discipline, and empathy, knowing when to correct behavior and when to offer encouragement, when to protect them from the harsh realities of frontier life, and when to push them toward independence and skill, understanding that the women who work under her are not merely employees, but also wards in a precarious world, many of whom have arrived with little more than courage and determination, seeking a livelihood that society has denied them elsewhere. She ensures that every woman knows her role, maintains professional boundaries, and conducts herself in a manner that upholds the reputation of the establishment, while simultaneously safeguarding her own authority. For even a single lapse in order or decorum could invite trouble, threaten the safety of her staff, or compromise the delicate social contracts she has negotiated with patrons, suppliers, and local authorities alike. Handling finances is equally demanding, as she must account for every coin exchanged, anticipate future expenses, make decisions about investments, repairs, and supplies, all while keeping an eye on the fluctuating needs of the business, such as hiring additional help during busy periods, negotiating prices with vendors who know the value of frontier scarcity, and setting aside reserves for unexpected challenges like illness, accidents, or conflicts that could disrupt the flow of daily operations. These financial responsibilities are compounded by the need to maintain discretion, for a misstep could attract unwanted attention from competitors, the law, or those with grudges, making the madam's ability to plan, adapt, and execute strategies with discretion an essential part of her skill set. Meanwhile, maintaining order requires constant vigilance, as the saloon is a place where tempers flare, negotiations sometimes turn sour, and patrons arrive with varying levels of patience, alcohol tolerance, and temperament, and it is the madam's responsibility to intervene swiftly and effectively, diffusing conflicts before they escalate into violence, mediating disputes with fairness that commands respect, and ensuring that her staff are protected while still keeping the operation running smoothly. Dealing with difficult customers is another layer of this delicate balancing act, requiring diplomacy, firmness, and an acute sense of human behavior, as she must read intentions, prevent exploitation, and navigate situations that could otherwise undermine the safety, morale, or profitability of her establishment, all while projecting the calm authority that reassures everyone in her care that, no matter the chaos outside or within, the saloon remains under her control, and that the complex web of responsibilities she carries is not a burden, but a testament to her ingenuity, resilience, and mastery of a world that few dare to understand, let alone navigate with such skill. And yet, even as the madam moves with practiced grace through her daily duties, it is impossible to ignore the relentless, almost tactile harshness of the environment in which she operates, a reality that shapes every choice, every step, and every interaction within the walls of the saloon, for the air itself seems to carry the weight of frontier life, thick with the mingling aromas of wood smoke curling from the pot-bellied stoves, the lingering tang of whiskey that saturates the air and seeps into the rough, uneven floorboards, and the faint but persistent traces of perfume and powder attempting to mask the raw odors of labor, sweat, and the constant motion of bodies and boots across wooden floors, creating an atmosphere that assaults the senses, even as it is normalized by those who live within it. Beyond the building itself, the town outside offers no relief, with the streets of packed dirt and gravel that churn into mud after a sudden storm, the acrid stench of manure from horses tethered in the alleyways, and the ceaseless clatter of wheels, hooves, and voices that rise and fall like the rhythm of some untamed symphony. A backdrop that intrudes on every quiet moment and ensures that no part of the day ever truly feels serene. While the constant noise within the saloon, piano keys struck too loudly or offbeat, laughter and arguments overlapping in unpredictable cadences. The occasional shout or clink of broken glass reminds everyone that calm is temporary, safety fragile, and control something that must be actively maintained at every second. Even the living quarters, above or behind the saloon, provide little sanctuary, with thin walls that fail to keep out the early morning light or the sounds of the street below, floors that groan under the weight of hurried footsteps, and simple furnishings that offer little comfort after nights spent on hard beds or sitting. 4 hours in the midst of business and drama, forcing both the madam and her staff to cultivate resilience as a daily necessity rather than an optional quality. For in a world so unyielding, weakness is an invitation for disaster, whether in the form of a dispute with a patron, a miscalculation in finances, or a threat from the unpredictable elements that govern frontier life. The harsh environment does more than challenge the body. It tests the mind, requiring constant vigilance, adaptability, and a mental stamina that rivals the physical endurance demanded by climbing stairs, carrying supplies, or navigating the chaotic ebb and flow of customers. And it is this unrelenting combination of sensory assault, social tension, and logistical complexity that makes the success of any madam so remarkable, revealing not only her ability to survive, but also to transform adversity into opportunity, to create, within the very heart of disorder, a space where her enterprise can flourish, her staff can find a measure of safety, and her influence, though invisible to most, radiates quietly through every corner of the town she helps to shape. Amidst the ceaseless clatter of the saloon and the relentless demands of frontier life, the madam's ability to think strategically becomes not just a skill, but a necessity, a survival mechanism honed through years of observation, experience, and an intimate understanding of human nature. And one of the first strategies she employs is the use of assumed names, a deliberate and calculated act designed to provide a shield of anonymity that protects her from both personal and professional threats, allowing her to operate with a level of freedom that would otherwise be impossible in towns where reputation spreads faster than gossip. In the slightest misstep can have devastating consequences. By adopting a persona, a name that is known only in business dealings, she creates a barrier between her private life and her public role, ensuring that her past, her family, her personal identity are insulated from the unpredictable dangers of frontier society, from unscrupulous competitors seeking to sabotage her enterprise to lawmen whose enforcement of regulations might be arbitrary and biased, and even from patrons who, intoxicated or emboldened by circumstance, could act recklessly if they knew more than they were meant to. Beyond the protection that assumed names afford, the strategic acumen of these women extends to every corner of their business. The layout of the saloon itself, carefully designed to control the flow of customers and minimize risk. The hiring of staff, chosen not merely for appearance or charm, but for intelligence, liability, and the ability to navigate difficult social interactions. The meticulous record-keeping of transactions, debts, and supplies, ensuring that the financial engine of the establishment never falters, despite the unpredictability of frontier commerce, and the cultivation of relationships with local authorities, business owners, and community influencers, forging alliances that provide both protection and opportunity, a subtle dance of diplomacy that allows her to operate openly while avoiding the scrutiny or interference that could derail her enterprise. Independence in this world is hard-won, and for these women, it is inseparable from their strategic approach to business. For each decision they make is a calculated risk designed to maximize control, profit, and safety, whether it is choosing to expand operations into a neighboring town, establishing networks with other madams to share information and prevent undercutting, or deciding when to extend credit to a patron whose loyalty could mean steady income for months to come. In a society that offers few legitimate paths for female autonomy, the Madam S carefully cultivated independence is both revolutionary and precarious. She commands authority in a space she has carved out entirely for herself, balancing the needs of her staff, the expectations of her customers, and the judgment of the broader community, all while keeping her personal life and identity insulated from the risks inherent in her line of work. And it is in this delicate equilibrium between visibility and discretion, control and adaptability, the true ingenuity of these women becomes evident, revealing a level of entrepreneurship, foresight, and resilience that rivals, and in many ways, surpasses the more celebrated achievements of their male contemporaries on the frontier. In a world where the law often seemed designed to confine women to the margins, denying them access to property, credit, or the simple freedoms of independent decision-making, these remarkable madams discovered, through necessity, an almost instinctive ability to find the cracks in the rigid framework of society and exploit them with a cunning that was as practical as it was daring, navigating the limitations imposed by restrictive legal structures with the same skill and precision they used to manage their saloons. And in doing so, they carved out a space where autonomy and authority were not just possible, but tangible, a reality that the majority of women in the frontier could scarcely imagine. While banks refused to extend loans to a woman whose name did not carry the weight of male endorsement, madams relied on networks of trusted allies, informal credit arrangements, and the reinvestment of earnings from traveling ventures to fund expansions, maintain their establishments, and protect their staff, turning what others perceived as barriers into opportunities for innovation, creativity, and self-reliance. Property ownership, too, was a minefield fraught with legal and social pitfalls, as most territories required a man's name on deeds, effectively limiting the ability of women to claim assets or secure long-term stability. Yet, through careful maneuvering, these women found methods to maintain control over their businesses, whether by placing trusted intermediaries as nominal owners, structuring agreements that ensured their continued authority, or leveraging social connections to negotiate arrangements to allow them to operate effectively while skirting legal restrictions. And in each case, the outcome was the same: a flourishing enterprise that not only provided income and protection for themselves, but also offered a relative haven for the women under their care. What is perhaps most impressive is that these strategies were not solely reactive, but visionary, demonstrating an understanding of risk, leverage, and long-term planning that rivals modern business practices. The madams recognized that the frontier was as much a landscape of opportunity as it was a terrain of danger, and they exploited the ambiguities in law, custom, and social expectation to their advantage, turning systemic inequities into mechanisms for empowerment and survival. By creatively navigating these legal and societal loopholes, they achieved a level of independence and influence that was rare for any person, let alone a woman in a profession condemned by the moral authorities of the day. And in doing so, they built legacies that quietly reshaped the towns they inhabited, leaving an imprint not on monuments or official records, but on the very rhythm of daily life, the safety of their staff, and the economic pulse of frontier communities that depended, in part, on their acumen, resilience, and daring ingenuity. Among the many women who navigated the treacherous yet opportunity-laden landscape of the frontier, few demonstrated the level of foresight, ingenuity, and sheer audacity exhibited by figures like Maddie Silks. His name became synonymous not only with success, but with a kind of strategic brilliance that allowed her to operate in a scale that few of her contemporaries could match. For Maddie understood that survival and prosperity in the unpredictable towns of the American West required movement, flexibility, and a constant eye for opportunity. And she wielded these tools with the precision of a seasoned general surveying a battlefield, always calculating her next step, anticipating obstacles, and turning even the smallest advantage into tangible gains that strengthened her enterprise and secured her independence. Rather than remaining confined to a single location, Maddie orchestrated what she called a mobile boarding setup, an innovative system that allowed her to transport her staff, supplies, and even parts of her establishment from one town to the next, effectively creating a traveling network of services that capitalized on the transient populations of miners, traders, and railroad workers who moved through the frontier. And in doing so, she ensured that each stop along the journey was not merely a waypoint, but a revenue-generating opportunity, a chance to establish new connections, test new markets, and expand the reach of her influence without being tethered to the limitations of any single town's economy or regulatory environment. Court journeys were calculated with meticulous attention to detail, scouting towns for demand, assessing competition, observing local law enforcement tendencies, timing arrivals to coincide with events or mining booms that guaranteed a surge of customers. And along the way, she trained her staff to operate with both discretion and confidence, ensuring that the mobile enterprise functioned smoothly regardless of location, while also teaching them to recognize patterns of behavior among patrons and rivals alike, instilling a sense of adaptability that allowed everyone under her care to thrive in circumstances that could otherwise have been chaotic or dangerous. By the time Maddie arrived in a larger hub like Denver or Kansas City, her mobile boarding house had already generated enough earnings to establish a more permanent presence, effectively turning each leg of the journey into a rolling investment strategy that minimized risk and maximized profitability, demonstrating a mastery of logistics, human resources, and economic insight that rivaled, if not exceeded, the sophistication of more conventional businesses in the same era. And all of this was achieved while operating under the constant pressures of societal scrutiny, legal ambiguity, and the ever-present potential for conflict, proving that strategic thinking, adaptability, or the willingness to seize opportunity at every turn were as critical to frontier success as courage or stamina. And in Maddie's example, we see the full spectrum of what made a madam not just a survivor, but a formidable entrepreneur, a tactician of human behavior, and a quiet architect of her own destiny in a world designed to deny her the very possibility of such independence. Even in a world defined by competition and survival, the madams of the frontier recognized that their strength was amplified not solely by individual skill or cunning, but by the networks they cultivated with one another. It's a surprising and often overlooked aspect of life in these frontier towns, where rivalries could be fierce, yet pragmatism demanded cooperation, and survival depended on a delicate balance between rivalry and alliance. For these women understood intuitively that, in the volatile environment of saloons and brothels, shared knowledge, mutual protection, and coordinated strategy were not signs of weakness, but essential tools of power. Meetings between madams were as strategic as they were social, often convened discreetly in the early hours or behind closed doors in well-appointed rooms, where they would discuss pricing structures to prevent undercutting that could destabilize the delicate economies of their establishments, share information about patrons whose temperaments or intentions posed a risk to staff or business, and advise one another on emerging opportunities. Whether it was a new mining camp, a traveling workforce in need of lodging and companionship, or shifts in local regulations that might require a temporary adjustment to operations. In these gatherings, respect and practical wisdom were the currency, and even the most seemingly minor details, such as the behavior of a local lawman, the timing of a shipment, or the arrival of a traveling performer, could become critical information, exchanged freely among women who knew that a well-informed community was a safer and more profitable one. The madams were adept at reading both people and circumstance, and their discussions often revealed a sophisticated understanding of risk management, human psychology, and market dynamics, allowing them to collectively anticipate challenges, avoid unnecessary conflicts, and even mitigate the consequences of events beyond their control, such as altercations with drunken patrons or sudden disruptions caused by rival operators or external authorities. This collaboration extended beyond business strategy into the personal safety and emotional well-being of their staff, as madams would warn one another about dangerous individuals, offer temporary shelter to women displaced by illness or conflict, and provide counsel on difficult situations that required both discretion and moral judgment, creating a loosely knit but remarkably resilient network of support in an otherwise unforgiving landscape. While each woman ultimately bore the responsibility for her own establishment, the alliances they formed created a web of interdependence that enhanced survival, reinforced professional standards, and ensured that knowledge, experience, and resources were shared rather than hoarded, a subtle but powerful form of solidarity that allowed these women to thrive in a society that otherwise offered them few avenues of security or respect. Through this delicate dance of competition and collaboration, the madams not only safeguarded their own businesses and staff, but also shaped the social and economic fabric of the frontier towns in which they operated, demonstrating a level of strategic sophistication, mutual respect, and adaptive intelligence that has often been overlooked in traditional histories, and proving that even in a profession judged harshly by society, cooperation, community, and shared purpose could create pockets of stability, empowerment, and opportunity, allowing these women to wield influence far beyond what appearances might suggest, quietly transforming the very environment they navigated with such skill and foresight. Amid the constant bustle of the saloon and the relentless demands of frontier life, a remarkable sense of community quietly flourished among the women who worked within these establishments, a network of solidarity born not out of necessity alone, but from an understanding that survival in such a harsh and unpredictable environment required mutual trust, shared responsibility, and a willingness to protect one another from the myriad dangers that lurked both inside and outside the walls of the saloon. And it was within this web of camaraderie that the women found a rare form of security, companionship, and emotional sustenance in a world that often treated them as expendable, marginalized, or morally suspect. For each woman quickly learned that her safety, her livelihood, and her sense of dignity were intimately tied to the collective strength of the group. Katana's gestures of support and informal mentorship could mean the difference between hardship and stability, fear and confidence, despair and hope. This sense of community manifested in countless ways, from the smallest acts of kindness, sharing a warm meal, offering a borrowed dress, or lending a sympathetic ear after a difficult encounter, to more strategic forms of protection, such as warning one another about dangerous customers, coordinating responses to disputes, or alerting colleagues to potential threats from rival operators or local authorities. And through these daily interactions, bonds were forged that went far beyond simple professional necessity, creating a network in which experience, knowledge, and wisdom were passed along with care, teaching younger or newer women the subtleties of negotiation, the importance of discretion, and the ways to navigate both human behavior and frontier law with skill and foresight. Within this informal but powerful community, Women learned to rely on each other in ways that transcended the typical employer-employee relationship, establishing codes of conduct that protected everyone's interests, mediating conflicts before they escalated, and celebrating one another's successes, whether that meant a particularly profitable week, a clever business maneuver, or the safe resolution of a potentially dangerous encounter. And in doing so, they created an environment that, while far from luxurious or without hardship, provided a sense of continuity, respect, and shared purpose that was rare in the unpredictable towns of the American West. The protective and mutually supportive bonds among these women also served to counteract the isolation and stigma imposed by broader society, allowing them to retain agency and confidence even when external forces sought to undermine them, and in moments of crisis, whether illness, personal loss, or confrontation with aggressive patrons. This network became both a shield and a lifeline, reminding each member that they were not alone, that experience could be shared, and that the collective wisdom of the group could transform fear into strategy, uncertainty into preparation, and vulnerability into resilience, reinforcing the idea that in a profession often misunderstood or judged harshly, solidarity and empathy were not only essential to survival, but also a profound source of empowerment and human dignity, creating a rare and remarkable community that defied the odds and reshaped the lives of the women who dared to claim their place within it. Within the constant hum of activity and the layered complexity of saloon life, madams developed a nuanced understanding of human behavior, learning to navigate the delicate balance between familiarity and authority in their relationships with regular customers, skill that required both empathy and strategic foresight. For these patrons, miners, weary from long days, traveling merchants seeking respite, wandering cowboys in need of comfort, were essential to the livelihood of the establishment. Yet each interaction carried potential risk, and the madam's success often hinged on her ability to cultivate loyalty, courage, repeat business, and maintain a calm, composed presence, even in the face of unpredictability, while simultaneously establishing professional boundaries that protected her staff, preserved order, and ensured that the enterprise operated with efficiency and dignity despite the chaotic surroundings. Regular customers were known by name, their preferences memorized, their moods anticipated, and their behaviors carefully monitored, allowing the madam to offer subtle gestures of recognition and respect that reinforced a sense of familiarity without inviting impropriety, creating an environment in which patrons felt welcomed and valued, yet understood clearly that the rules and structure of the establishment were non-negotiable, and that any breach of conduct would be addressed swiftly and discreetly, preserving both safety and reputation. It was a continuous exercise in psychological acumen, blending charm, authority, and attentiveness, a performance that required constant observation, quick thinking, and an intuitive grasp of social dynamics, skills that were as critical to survival and prosperity as any ledger or inventory record. Equally important were the relationships cultivated with town officials, slawmen, and community influencers, a network of tenuous alliances that demanded diplomacy, tact, and, at times, careful negotiation of favors and information. For the madam operated in a great area of legality and social acceptability, and her ability to maintain operational stability depended on her credibility, discretion, and strategic generosity, whether that meant providing insight about potential disturbances, offering modest gifts of appreciation for timely enforcement, or simply demonstrating that her establishment was orderly, well-managed, and non-threatening to the broader community. A subtle diplomacy that allowed her to operate openly while mitigating interference and ensuring that her enterprise could thrive without drawing undue scrutiny. Through these dual channels of relationship management, nurturing the loyalty of regular patrons while maintaining strategic ties with civic authorities, the madam exercised an extraordinary form of social intelligence, leveraging personal interactions into institutional stability and economic security, creating a framework in which the enterprise was not only financially viable, but resilient against the unpredictable forces of frontier life. And in doing so, she transformed what might otherwise have been a precarious, stigmatized position into one of influence, authority, and carefully measured respect, proving that the art of leadership on the frontier extended far beyond the ledger and the ledger room, reaching into the very heart of human connection and community. Dynamics that defined the rhythm and safety of everyday life in the town she quietly helped to shape. Amid the constant motion and unpredictable challenges of frontier life, one of the less obvious yet absolutely critical elements of a Madame's survival and success was her ability to cultivate and maintain working relationship with local law enforcement, a delicate partnership that required equal parts diplomacy, respect, and strategic foresight. For the men tasked with upholding order, sheriffs, deputies, and town marshals were both allies and arbiters of the thin line between legality and chaos. And the Madame's skill in navigating this relationship often determined whether her establishment could operate smoothly, withstand disputes, or recover quickly from potentially destabilizing events. And in a world where a single violent confrontation or the misstep of an intoxicated patron could escalate into a legal nightmare or a threat to staff safety, these relationships were far from optional. They were lifelines, forged through careful attention to protocol, timely communication, and an almost intuitive sense of timing and discretion. The collaboration often took subtle and strategic forms, a well-placed word or gesture to indicate that the saloon's affairs were orderly, sharing information about unruly or dangerous individuals before incidents escalated, or discreetly signaling when additional security might be required for particularly rowdy nights. All of which allowed law enforcement to act preemptively, reducing the risk of conflict while reinforcing the Madame's authority and control over her space. And, in return, the officers gained reliability, respect, and the knowledge that their enforcement efforts were less likely to provoke resistance or disruption in the community, thus creating a mutually beneficial dynamic that strengthened both sides while maintaining an uneasy yet necessary balance of power. These interactions demanded more than mere politeness. They required careful observations, social intelligence, and a consistent demonstration of competence and fairness within the establishment. That lawmen could trust the Madame to maintain order without unnecessary intervention. And each encounter, from casual greetings at the bar to more formal discussions behind closed doors, was an opportunity to reinforce credibility, assert authority, and subtly negotiate the space in which the business could operate without interference, all while maintaining the safety of staff and patrons alike. Through this careful, ongoing collaboration, Madames were able to anticipate potential threats, respond efficiently to incidents, and even subtly influence the perception of their establishment in the eyes of the community, transforming what might have been a source of vulnerability into a strategic asset, demonstrating yet again that their acumen extended far beyond the financial or operational realm, encompassing the social and political intelligence required to thrive in a world that offered few protections and even fewer guarantees, proving that in the volatile, high-stakes environment of frontier towns, survival and prosperity depended not just on resourcefulness or courage, but on the ability to build alliances, manage perceptions, and navigate the delicate web of authority and law that underpinned daily life. Beneath the outward appearance of calculated control, strategic alliances, and thriving business operations, the life of a Madame in the frontier was fraught with challenges and risks that tested not only her physical endurance, but also her emotional resilience. For each day brought with it a delicate balance between opportunity and danger, triumph and vulnerability, and the consequences of miscalculation could be swift and severe, leaving no room for error, hesitation, or misplaced trust. And this constant tension shaped the character, decisions, and relationships of the women who undertook this demanding line of work. Violence was an ever-present specter in the saloon, manifesting in myriad forms, from drunken brawls that erupted unexpectedly among patrons to calculated threats from outsiders seeking to exploit, intimidate, or extort, and even the occasional confrontations with law enforcement that, though mitigated through diplomacy, could escalate if mismanaged. In every case, the madam was forced to maintain vigilance, intervene when necessary, and make instantaneous judgments that could prevent injury, safeguard staff, protect the integrity of the establishment. And each decision carried weight, not only for the safety of those in her employ, but for the ongoing reputation and survival of her business. Health risks compounded these dangers, as long hours on her feet, poor nutrition, and the physically taxing nature of managing multiple responsibilities placed tremendous strain on the body, while the emotional toll of constant stress, vigilance, the responsibility for others' well-being weighed heavily on the mind, creating fatigue that could easily affect judgment, patience, and morale. Illness, injury, or even a temporary lapse in attention could ripple through the operation, undermining both productivity and safety, requiring the madam to be both caretaker and strategist, healer and enforcer, manager and mediator, all at once, demonstrating a resilience and adaptability that was as impressive as it was necessary for survival. Perhaps the most insidious risk was the social stigma that surrounded the profession, a relentless, pervasive judgment that could follow women far beyond the walls of their establishments, shaping interactions with neighbors, officials, and potential allies, and often limiting future opportunities or avenues of reinvention. This stigma was compounded by a society that offered little forgiveness, rarely acknowledged contributions, consistently treated women in the trade as morally suspect, a constant reminder that every decision, every encounter, and every business transaction carried the potential for reputational harm that could jeopardize relationships, revenue, and personal safety, reinforcing the precariousness of even the most carefully managed enterprise. Yet, despite these formidable risks, violence, health challenges, and social censure, the madams persevered. Relying on ingenuity, experience, and the informal networks of community and support they had painstakingly built over time, transforming vulnerability into strategy, adversity into opportunity, and societal limitation into personal empowerment. And it is precisely this combination of courage, intelligence, and unwavering commitment to both self and staff that underscores the remarkable resilience and enduring legacy of these women, who navigated a world of uncertainty with skill, dignity, and a rare mastery of both human and economic terrain that continues to fascinate historians and storytellers alike. The harsh realities of frontier life were never abstract concepts for the women who ran these establishments. They were lived experiences, felt in every hurried decision, every wary glance, and every calculated risk. And few events captured the precariousness of their world more sharply than tragedies like the untimely death of Lily, a young woman whose story became a sobering reminder that, in the unpredictable environment of a mining town, danger could arrive with the suddenness of a passing storm. And no amount of vigilance or experience could entirely shield those under a Madame S. care from its reach, leaving both a lasting emotional mark and practical consequences that rippled through the community. Lily's passing was not the result of negligence or carelessness, but of the intersection between the inherent volatility of frontier life and the human unpredictability that colored every interaction, from the erratic behavior of patrons to the occasional misjudgment of strangers whose intentions were unknown and often inscrutable. And in the wake of her death, the women of the establishment were forced to confront the emotional weight of responsibility, the limits of their influence, and the stark reality that even their best-laid precautions could not eliminate risk entirely, reinforcing the constant tension between opportunity and danger that defined their work. The aftermath was both practical and profoundly human. Protocols were reassessed, routines adjusted, and the community of women leaned on one another more heavily, sharing grief, offering counsel, and reaffirming the protective measures that had always served as a buffer against harm. while simultaneously acknowledging the fragility of their environment. The fine line between control and chaos, and the necessity of balancing vigilance with compassion, discipline with humanity, and authority with empathy, all in real time amid the cacophony of saloon life. The clatter of glassware, the hum of piano keys, and the distant rumble of mining carts on the town's dusty streets. Stories like Lily's death also underscored the psychological resilience required of a madam. For beyond the operational responsibilities and the financial stakes lay the profound burden of safeguarding not just a business, but the lives, dignity, and well-being of those who depended on her, and the emotional labor involved in absorbing grief, making difficult decisions, continuing operations in the face of tragedy, revealed an often overlooked dimension of frontier entrepreneurship, one in which courage was measured not only by confrontation with lawlessness or market risk, but by the quiet, steadfast endurance of grief, vigilance, and moral responsibility. And in recounting Lily's story, we glimpse the intricate tapestry of courage, care, and calculated risk that defined the daily existence of these remarkable women. Ultimately, Lily's story and others like it illuminates the duality of life in the frontier, opportunity and peril existing side by side, progress and tragedy intertwined. And the women who navigated this world demonstrated an extraordinary combination of strategic insight, emotional resilience, and practical wisdom, ensuring that even in moments of loss, the enterprise endured, the community remained intact, and lessons were absorbed that would inform every subsequent decision, shaping both the individual and collective survival of the women who dared to claim agency in a world that offered little sanctuary or certainty. In reflecting on the lives of these women, one cannot help but be struck by the extraordinary combination of resilience, intelligence, adaptability that defined their existence. For the madams of the Wild West were not merely operators of saloons or managers of businesses. Theirs are architects of survival, strategists of human behavior, and masters of social negotiation in an environment that offered few guarantees, and every choice they made demanded foresight, courage, and a fluid ability to respond to circumstances that could shift from mundane to life-threatening in the blink of an eye. Resilience was perhaps their most visible trait, evidenced not only in the long hours they endured on their feet, navigating a labyrinth of financial ledgers, staff schedules, and patron needs, but also in the way they absorbed the emotional weight of tragedies, conflicts, and constant uncertainty without allowing despair or fear to paralyze their decision-making. For each challenge, whether a violent patron, the sudden loss of a trusted employee, or the unpredictable judgment of local authorities, was met with a mixture of calm calculation and practical empathy, reinforcing the notion that endurance on the frontier required more than brute strength. It required a capacity to rebound, adapt, and maintain equilibrium in a world defined by volatility. Intelligence manifested in both the overt and subtle elements of their work, from meticulous financial planning and strategic expansion to nuanced interpersonal management and the careful cultivation of alliances with law enforcement, local officials, and peers, demonstrating an understanding of human nature, economics, and community dynamics that rivaled that of any recognized leader of the time, and often in ways that went unacknowledged by the broader society, which was quick to stigmatize the profession, but slow to recognize the sophistication, acumen, and foresight required to succeed within it. Adaptability was the thread that wove resilience and intelligence together. Visible in a way madams like Maddie Silks could pivot operations to follow opportunities, establish mobile boarding arrangements, and respond to shifting market demands, legal restrictions, and social pressures, constantly recalibrating strategy while preserving core values, safety, and the well-being of those under their care. And in doing so, they exemplified an extraordinary flexibility, balancing risk and reward, discipline and creativity, authority and diplomacy, crafting a life that was both precarious and empowered. Shaped by necessity, yet elevated by skill, foresight, and unwavering determination. Taken together, these qualities reveal a profound truth. The women who operated these establishments were far more than the narrow labels imposed upon them by history or society. They were pioneers of agency, architects of community, and masters of strategy and human insight, navigating a landscape that tested every aspect of their character, yet producing lives of impact, influence, and undeniable resilience, leaving behind lessons that extend far beyond the confines of the frontier saloon, offering enduring insight into what it means to adapt, to survive, and thrive under conditions that demand courage, intelligence, and an unwavering commitment to both self and those whose lives are intertwined with yours. Beyond the ledger books, the negotiations with patrons, and the delicate diplomacy with town authorities, the true legacy of the madams lay in the stability, employment, and mentorship they offered to the women who chose or were forced into a world that society often left bereft of opportunity. For in towns where the options for independence were severely limited, where few respectable professions could provide financial security, autonomy, or a sense of personal dignity, these women became pillars of possibility, creating environments in which those under their guidance could learn not only a trade, but also lessons in resilience, strategy, and self-reliance that would serve them long after the doors of the saloon closed. Employment in a saloon or brothel was never merely transactional. It was an entry point into a structured ecosystem in which women received instruction in practical business management, interpersonal skills, negotiation, and the subtle arts of persuasion, observation, and discretion, all while navigating the volatile dynamics of a frontier town that could shift overnight from prosperity to danger. In this daily immersion in a high-stakes environment taught lessons that extended far beyond the immediate economic gains, offering tools for autonomy, critical thinking, caked and calculated decision-making that were rare for women of the era and often impossible to acquire in conventional society. Mentorship, too, was a cornerstone of the madam's influence, for beyond the physical and operational aspects of running a business, they imparted wisdom about emotional intelligence, conflict resolution, and the cultivation of relationships, ensuring that younger or newer women entering the profession were not simply left to navigate danger on their own, but were guided by the experience, insight, protective instincts of those who had already survived the intricate and often unforgiving ecosystem of the frontier saloon, creating a sense of continuity, shared knowledge, and human connection that transformed what could have been an isolating and perilous existence into one in which learning, growth, and cautious empowerment were possible. In doing so, madams provided a rare form of social scaffolding in an environment that afforded women limited choices and little societal recognition, fostering networks of support and instruction that allowed women to earn a living with a measure of security, dignity, and agency, while also establishing enduring bonds that blurred the line between employer and mentor, authority and protector, demonstrating that within the margins of a society that constrained female independence, these women carved out spaces of relative freedom, opportunity, and community, leaving behind a legacy of empowerment, resilience, and practical wisdom that resonates far beyond the confines of their immediate world, offering insight into how resourcefulness, courage, and mentorship can transform not only individual lives, but entire communities, even in the most challenging and restrictive circumstances. As the years wore on and the frenetic pace of frontier life gradually settled into something resembling routine, many madams found themselves at a crossroads where reflection, experience, and strategic foresight converged, allowing them for the first time to assess the fruits of a lifetime of labor, vigilance, and calculated risk-taking. And for some, this reflection revealed the hard-won reward of financial security, carefully accrued and invested over decades of running complex, high-stakes enterprises in environments that tested both body and spirit. And while money could provide comfort, choice, and the possibility of a quieter life beyond the saloon doors. It could not erase the ever-present shadow of societal judgment that followed them even into retirement, reminding the man those who observed their journeys that economic independence alone could not fully shield a woman from the rigid moral and social hierarchies of the era. Yet, even within these constraints, the legacy of a madam extended far beyond the accumulation of wealth. It was evident in the structures they had built, the lessons they imparted, and the communities they nurtured, for each carefully managed establishment represented not only a source of livelihood, but a hub of organization, mentorship, and mutual support that had ripple effects across the town, shaping the lives of countless women and influencing the local social and economic fabric in ways that rarely received acknowledgement in official records, histories, or public memory. In this quiet impact, though often obscured by stigma or oversight, speaks volumes about their ingenuity, foresight, and determination to thrive in spaces where conventional opportunities were scarce. Financial security, though, came with its own set of limitations, particularly in an era when societal structures often imposed restrictions on property ownership, public recognition, even the simple acceptance of a woman's accomplishments, meaning that many madams, despite their savvy and success, remained acutely aware that respect, admiration, or full acknowledgement from the broader community was often elusive, a reminder that their victories, while tangible in terms of assets, safety, and personal autonomy, existed alongside enduring challenges that demanded continual negotiation, resilience, and the careful balancing of ambition with prudence, visibility with discretion, and independence with social tact. In the end, the recognition that madams did achieve, whether through the loyalty of their employees, the respect of carefully cultivated allies, or the discreet admiration of those who understood the complexity of their accomplishments, was a testament to the extraordinary skill, courage, and vision required to operate successfully in a world that provided few formal avenues for female leadership or autonomy. And their legacy, though often unheralded in mainstream historical accounts, endures as a vivid example of resourcefulness, determination, the quiet yet profound ways in which women carved out power, stability, and influence, leaving a footprint on frontier society that is both tangible in its economic impact and immeasurable in its human dimension, revealing that even in the margins, leadership, resilience, and strategic insight could flourish against all odds. Though the saloons and boarding houses they managed were often viewed through the narrow lens of morality by the broader society, the contributions of madams to frontier towns were far more profound and lasting than popular perception or even official history would suggest. For these women were not merely operators of businesses existing on the fringes of social acceptability, but pivotal figures in the economic, social, and cultural life of their communities, whose influence shaped patterns of commerce, employment, and local governance in subtle yet undeniable ways, ensuring that towns could function, prosper, and sometimes even flourish in an environment that was otherwise harsh, unpredictable, and resistant to conventional forms of social organization, by providing structured employment, mentorship, and economic opportunities for women who otherwise had few paths to independence. Madams acted as stabilizing forces, fostering small networks of trust, loyalty, cooperation that extended beyond the walls of their establishments and into the town itself, subtly influencing the rhythm of daily life, the flow of commerce, and the balance between order and chaos in settlements that were often in flux, populated by miners, merchants, travelers, and transient laborers whose needs were as diverse as they were demanding, and whose behavior could turn from routine to dangerous in a matter of moments. Yet, despite this significance, their achievements rarely found their way into mainstream historical narratives, overshadowed by the more publicly celebrated figures of the era, or dismissed entirely due to the social stigma associated with their profession. And as a result, the stories of these women, of their strategic foresight, business acumen, courage under threat, and dedication to community remained largely hidden, preserved only in fragments of personal accounts, newspapers, or oral histories, often requiring careful reconstruction to reveal the full scope of their impact. And this lack of recognition underscores not only the resilience required to navigate frontier life, but also the enduring invisibility of women's labor and leadership in historical memory, challenging us to look beyond conventional records and to appreciate the nuanced ways in which influence, power, and legacy can manifest in spaces traditionally marginalized or overlooked. By piecing together the lives and actions of these madams, we gain a clearer picture of how they shaped frontier society, demonstrating that their role was not confined to the immediate, tangible operations of a saloon or boarding house, but extended into the moral, economic, and social architecture of the town itself, bridging gaps in opportunity, creating systems of accountability and protection, and offering guidance, mentorship, and resources that stabilized communities, nurtured resilience, and quietly transformed the contours of life on the frontier, leaving a legacy that, while unheralded in conventional histories, remains profoundly instructive for anyone seeking to understand the intricate web of survival, influence, and human ingenuity in the challenging environment of 19th century America. As we reflect on the remarkable lives of these women, it becomes clear that Wild West madams were far more than the narrow labels history often applied to them. They were shrewd business people, community builders, and agents of survival in a frontier world that offered little support, limited opportunity, and constant danger, yet demanded resilience, intelligence, and creativity for anyone seeking even a semblance of independence. The madams of the 1870s transformed a profession that society stigmatized into enterprises of strategic and practical significance, navigating every challenge with foresight, discipline, and a careful eye toward both human and financial resources. In the dim light of saloons that filled the towns of the American frontier, these women orchestrated a complex symphony of responsibilities, overseeing the daily lives of the girls under their care, managing finances with precision and skill, maintaining order amid often unruly patrons, and constantly responding to emergencies that could arise without warning, all while preserving a professional environment that balanced control with a sense of community. The physical and mental demands of this life were immense, yet madams rose to the challenge, mastering not only operational logistics, but also the subtle art of human relations, building networks of trust and loyalty, both within their walls and beyond, into the streets, the sheriff's office, and the broader town itself. Operating under assumed names for safety, they navigated restrictive societal laws that often barred women from obtaining loans, owning property, or otherwise exercising autonomy, finding creative loopholes and adopting mobile strategies that allowed them to follow opportunity wherever it arose. Figures like Maddie Silks exemplified this blend of pragmatism and ambition, traveling strategically, establishing mobile boarding arrangements, and seizing economic openings at every stop, all while ensuring that the women under their guidance were protected, supported, and able to contribute to the operation's success. Despite inevitable competition, madams frequently collaborated, setting prices, sharing intelligence about potential threats, and providing mutual support, creating an informal network of protection that strengthened the survival prospects of all involved. Within this community, mentorship and guidance flourished, offering women practical instruction, emotional support, and guidance in navigating a society that afforded them few legitimate alternatives. These networks were not only practical, but also deeply human, fostering bonds of solidarity, trust, and shared responsibility that helped sustain both individuals and the broader enterprise through the unpredictable rhythms of frontier life. Interactions with customers and town officials demanded a careful balance of charm, firmness, and strategic diplomacy. Regular patrons were treated with respect and attentiveness, but professional boundaries were maintained to ensure safety and order, while relationships with sheriffs, deputies, Other law enforcement figures were cultivated to prevent conflicts and protect both the women and the business. Even amidst these systems of organization and negotiation, risks remained ever present. Violence, health hazards, and social stigma were constant companions. And events like the tragic death of Lily illustrated in stark terms the unpredictability and danger that defined frontier existence, highlighting both the courage required to operate in this world and the delicate human networks that made survival possible. Through all of this, madams displayed remarkable personal insight and reflection. They embodied resilience, intelligence, and adaptability, qualities that allowed them not only to endure, but also to shape the lives of those around them, providing stability, employment, and mentorship in a society where options for independence were limited for women. Their leadership extended far beyond the operational demands of a saloon, influencing communities, safeguarding employees, and cultivating systems of protection and mutual aid that helped entire towns function more safely and efficiently. By the time many of these women retired, they had achieved some level of financial security, though societal judgment remained an ever-present constraint, reminding them that recognition, respect, and freedom were not fully granted by the world they had navigated so skillfully. Yet their contributions, though largely absent from mainstream historical narratives, were profound. They were economic innovators, community organizers, and mentors whose influence helped define the social and economic fabric of frontier towns. Even if history has overlooked their impact, the lives of these women leave an enduring lesson about resourcefulness, courage, and the power of strategic leadership in spaces that demand both intelligence and heart. As we bring this story to a close, it is worth remembering that the legacy of Wild West madams is not only in the survival of their enterprises or the wealth they amassed, but also in the lives they touched, the communities they strengthened, and the resilience and ingenuity they demonstrated in a world that often gave them little, yet demanded everything. Their stories remind us that even in the most challenging and constrained circumstances, it is possible to carve out agency, provide care, and leave a lasting mark, shaping the lives of others while navigating uncertainty with skill and courage. So, tonight, as you settle into your own safe space, take a moment to reflect on the strength, strategy, and quiet heroism of these remarkable women, and let their story be a gentle reminder of resilience, ingenuity, and the enduring power of community. Close your eyes, breathe slowly, and allow the quiet of the night to carry you into rest, knowing that courage can take many forms, and sometimes it lives in those who worked tirelessly behind the scenes. Good night, and sleep well.